from RespectMyRegion.com, back with another episode of the RMR Podcast. Today, joined by special guest Ken Kuhlow of Chameleon Glass. How you doing today, Ken?
Great. How you doing, Mitch?
I cannot complain, man. Cannot complain. I'm up here in the Seattle area. We had a nice mild day today, in betwixt like a week of rain. So I'm stoked, man.
I miss the rain. For all the people that complain about the rain, we're going to be 115 by the end of the week, and we're in a kind of a drought situation down here in the desert. So I miss the rain. I trips to Seattle are great. The gray is great. I like the rain. So when you don't have it, you miss it.
Absolutely. And I like it too. People always think of Seattle as the rain, but I always tell everyone it's like this. It's either gray or this drizzle where you like don't even get wet. It's always somehow raining, but you just don't really. It's not like a torrential downpour, but it does get old after about 8 or 9 months. And you were joining me from what part? I forget what city of Arizona you're located in.
Phoenix.
Okay. Yeah. So you're definitely right there in the peak of the hotness, man.
The oven.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to kick off every episode or every guest conversation with our guests is kind of their origin story around cannabis. Obviously, Glass online, we don't necessarily talk directly about cannabis. A lot of product descriptions is tobacco pipes and things of that nature. But, what we do at RMR is cover the cannabis industry, and Glass has a very big impact and place within the industry. So I'm just kind of curious of your origin story personally and professionally around the plant.
Around the plant was high school, and it was one of those things where I was probably a little bit of an angry young man growing up. And then all of a sudden I admit it, 9th grade, I went to a party, did some hash under glass, and for like a day and a half afterwards, everything was right with the world. And I didn't really understand it at that point. All I knew was things were a lot better with cannabis. And so I started smoking on a regular basis whenever I could. Pretty traditional parents, so I had to keep it under wraps. And, since that time, except for a few years in the U.S. Army, cannabis has been a big part of my life ever since. And what turns out is, I'm one of those people that my body doesn't quite manufacture everything that I need. So I've got high cholesterol, and I don't have the right blood pressure control hormones. And my endocannabinoid system doesn't produce enough cannabinoids for me to regulate my mood properly. And so when you get me on a bad day, it's usually because I have not been smoking recently. And so that's my cannabis story is more of a biological need. And I thoroughly enjoy the headspace of it. I'm not going to BS. THC makes me feel good. CBD keeps my mood right, and CBG helps me to go to sleep and stay asleep. So anytime during the day, I've got many, many different cannabinoids running around in my system.
Absolutely. I love that you're in tune with the science of the plant and the different applications and the benefits in the daily life. I know a lot of us daily consumers, this was like, is it recreational? Is it medical? For some of us, it's a lot of things at a lot of different points, depending on the day, the part of the day. That's what it's doing for me. Yeah. So, alongside that, what's your favorite way to consume? Obviously, being in the glass industry, and you're exposed to a ton of different pieces and consumption methods. But what's kind of your preferred consumption method?
If I'm on the go, I always have a glass hand pipe with me. If I'm at home, it's going to be out of one of my bongs. So I do prefer water filtration, not so much for the filtration part of it as much as the cooling part of it.
Absolutely.
But, definitely, I grew up with my first pipe. I had a wood pipe was my first piece, and it had a little lid that went off. And it looked like a Spock ear, so that was Dr. Spock. And I've had my fair share of metal pipes. And but at this point in time, and probably for the last 30 years, it's always been glass.
And then along with that, you just mentioned you got a name for your piece. Most glass heads, have a name for each individual piece. Are you? I'm sure you have countless pieces, so maybe some go named, some go unnamed. But how many of your pieces are named, and what's the inspiration behind that you use to come up with a name for a piece?
It's strictly, what it looks like, or what. Like, I'll also name pieces for events. Like my wife and I go to Telluride Bluegrass, so there's the Telluride piece, and then there's a couple of different, like I have a really black nasty one, intentionally black nasty, like half sandblasted, half not, a lot of sharp parts on it, and that's my death metal piece. And then there's Dr. Spock. I got a Willy Wonka. So. I name all of our designs too. We a lot of people kind of laugh when I'll rattle off names instead of just SKU numbers, because I feel like giving a piece a name kind of lends a little bit more to the soul of each one of them. And so if you get on the website, you'll start seeing that there's a lot of websites out there that's like thick frit head, blah, and it's like more of a description of what it is or how it's made.
Yeah.
Whereas I have a tendency of name pieces, I'll sit back and free associate, pull a tube, and the name comes to me, and that's it. So if you were to sit and read my list of SKUs, you'd think I was pretty much high 24/7.
I love that, but that's the consumer base, right? Any glass head's got their shelf or their cabinet or their storage, and different names, different occasions.
Absolutely.
I know. I understand how that goes. When did you first start blowing glass, or did it start with like a different art form or medium before you made your way to glass?
It wasn't the traditional route. I worked for a company called General Electric when I was living in the Midwest, and we made fluorescent light bulbs at a couple of plants in and around Northern Ohio. Back before that became not such a cool thing to do. And so the machines we used needed constant upkeep. And so I got to know glass by function, because as the plant engineer or visiting plant engineer or process engineer, we really had to understand how the glass behaved before we could show the machines how to do what we wanted them to do, so to speak. And so I got to know soft glass, which is not what I work in right now, but that's really where it came from. And it was totally by accident. That was my first assignment off of MMP, and figure it out. And so I got to know how the dollops worked and how the ovens were working, and which of the chemicals that we were throwing into the mix was going to do what with the glass, and this made it brittle and that made it soft and buttery, and this furnace ran at this amount, and there was another furnace that you couldn't get above melting point on, and so it all came together. And then they sent everything to China. And hey, Ken, great career opportunity. You can move to Shenzhen. And all the guys coming back from MMP all said the same thing, and they quit. They all said, forget it. They don't like you. They're never going to like you. As soon as they figure out what you've got, you're going to end up, the keys won't work anymore. Your telephone won't ring. And you're going to try and get a plane back to the States as quickly as possible. And so that was when I said, see ya, GE. And I was looking around, and it was right about the time Jerry was still around with us. And every time I went out to a show and I was hanging out on lot, there were always, it wasn't really prevalent, but there was always like 5 or 6 tarps or blankets out in the parking lot that you could buy glass pipes at. And I'm like, okay, but I know about glass. This isn't, only if you keep it at home. And the guys were like, no, this is something different. This is Pyrex. This is sodium, or not, this is borosilicate. And so, never used it, got into it, loved it, started reading up. Bob Snodgrass had done his first couple of pieces, got to meet him out at Soldier Field for a show, and just kind of the background of it is I did all the Army and engineer stuff because I knew I was going to get a job and was going to get a scholarship to go to school. But my other high school career was an artist, and most of my family are starving artists, with the emphasis on starving. And so I never really thought that I could make a go of it doing artwork, but functional artwork is, legit, whether it's plates and cups and goblets and stuff like that, or, bongs, pipes, that kind of a thing. And so that's where I made the transition to, I don't have a job, to let's make a go of this because I don't have anything to lose right now. I was young and stupid and didn't know any better.
I love that, and I love the and can associate with just the merging of two worlds, right? Like this thing that you want, this passion, creative outlet that you didn't know could be a job, and then you go out, take the safe route, if you will, and then realize, identify the connection back to the passion. I really like that. What was your first couple experiences blowing glass in this vein to make pieces, and what was that process like? Did you learn from someone else, or just kind of start, had those tools already and started kind of making it go on your own?
Well, it's an interesting thing. Chameleon Glass actually existed before me. I got into it, and the guy who really started it had put the company up for sale for a number of different reasons. And when I visited him, buying a business is not all that different from buying a house. And so you go in, you check out the plumbing, you check out the air conditioner, whatever, the roof. And same thing with the business, the AR, the business end of it. And he wanted nothing to do with manufacturing. And it was getting to the point where he was having difficulty keeping up because it was really kind of backyard garage type blowing, and show up at the meet and buy 10 of those and 20 of those, and then you'd never see the blower again, and it's impossible to run a business that way. And he was struggling with it, and here I am, and I'm like, okay, we need to do this. You got to have a high pressure vaporizer on this end. You got to control gas pressure fluctuations, so you've got consistent heat at the torch. And I looked at it from much more of a technical aspect. And so my first time was really just setting up the first studio and sitting down and what does this torch do at this pressure, and how much how much heat can we apply before it goes to liquefaction. And then had a couple of guys. I remember Randy Kennedy helped me out quite a bit. I sat and watched him, threw my shades on, and made some absolute shankers. But the whole color change thing was something that I loved, and sitting there and being able to, number one, sit in front of something that is much hotter than lava coming out of a volcano. Lava at a volcano is about 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take. And the torches that we have start at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. And just that mad rush of I've got something in my hands right now it's literally like holding a grenade. It's ticking away. You've got to do something with it, and you better know what you're doing, because if it lands in your lap, it gets ugly real quick. So mother of invention, you learn how to control it. And after you learn how to control it, then you learn how to decorate it. And after you learn how to decorate it, then you learn how to shape it and turn it into, next level of cool and next level of function. And so, I've been very lucky to have a lot of really giving individuals who either joined me to help train, paid or unpaid, worked for me that was, just stellar. Had a host of really good guys. Probably Mixed Glass, Mike Coughlin was most formative in my ideas of how we can manipulate the media and turn it into the, as visually attractive and as functional as possible. And so I've just been really blessed to have access to people who contributed and didn't mind sharing. And that was, the business was since 1991. I took over in 2000, right after Y2K. And, it's been a hell of a ride ever since.
And, something I want to touch on is obviously with glass pieces, there's two components you were speaking on: functionality and then like the creative, the design. Mm-hmm. Obviously, to have something, I feel like that probably cuts through the mold for you, it's got to touch on both of those. But if you could weigh which one is more impactful to you in terms of functionality or just like creativity, which one would you put a little more weight on?
It's the creativity for sure. The beauty in the art, it's beauty first, function second. Big fan of function. I mean, we've designed some really cool functional pieces. But if I chose one, easy peasy lemon squeezy. It's the beauty of the art.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And with that functionality, what are those things that you're constantly looking to improve or provide through functionality?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things. Functionality is there's two parts of it. There's the obvious one that everybody sees at the sesh or online or at the demo or from the influencer. We put the slits this way to make the water in the bowl rotate, or we add this percolator, or we do something of that nature. Then there's the secondary function, which is probably a little bit more where I'm parked, which is, and it's the engineer in me. I apologize. I look at stuff and say, how can this get better? What small thing is going to dramatically improve or revolutionize what is otherwise a pretty bland or straightforward thing? Probably the first one that we did back in 2002 was the ash catcher mouthpiece. It was real simple. I hated screens. Number one, people were still putting metal screens in pipes. Blech. All you did was taste the screen. Yeah. And if you didn't have a screen though, and if the bowl hole is too small or the bowl hole is too big, you get pull through, too small, you get clogging. And so, but there's always a certain amount of pull through. And, just sitting there, and that epiphany in the shower came up, and I'm like, well, we drop a bowl into where we want to smoke it. We can use the same tool. We can put a bowl in the mouthpiece, and that way, instead of funneling all the ash to the hole in the mouthpiece right there, it's actually going to deflect all of that stuff and have it stick in the glass instead. Okay, so I got to clean the pipe a little bit more often, but I'm not getting ash in my mouth. And so it's those little things that you take for granted, and all of a sudden you really kind of rethink it after a while and say, and ash catcher mouthpieces are ubiquitous now. They're all over the place, and everybody uses them. And unfortunately, in the cannabis industry, to this date, I'm not allowed to have patents or anything like that because I'm in a federally illegal business of drug paraphernalia. So, we create stuff and it gets passed around, and that's just the way it is in the cannabis business. I think one of the more interesting was everybody has seen Gandalf pipes. And I was sitting there the other day, and your standard Gandalf, except for this thing. And just taking an extra, let's call it minute in the torch right there, very gently warming it up so you don't burn the silver fume off. You create an area where gravity, which we use gravity all the time, it's not really glass blowing as much as hand forming it. Gravity is a way or a tool that we use to divert smoke or divert bubbles. And by putting that little bubble in the middle of the stem, I can use that as a natural perk because the water will constantly fall in on itself in that bubble and replenish in the bottom. So it's acting like a percolator, but there's nothing else. It's just the laws of physics at work. And by putting that little change in there, I can now provide for my customers a dry piece when you want it, or you put about a tablespoon of water in there and you've got a natural perk bubbler on your hands. So it's those little things that you can do to reinvent what is a standard looking thing, and for very little more cost, provide a supremely more functional piece for people to buy. So that's the kind of stuff that I look at. So in the grand scheme of things on function, the high end stuff is kind of the province of when you look at the super high-end US-made stuff, it's thousands of dollars. The super high-end functional stuff, since the business is so labor-dependent, 70% of my bottom line is taken by paying people to make pipes. And that's not true of most businesses. Most businesses, 30, 35% labor cost, we're much higher than that. And so by necessity, finding neat ways, hacks or tricks like that to improve functionality, those are the things that I'm always kind of looking at that pipe that I've been making for the last 7 or 8 years and saying, what can we do with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that, I totally understand that, like what makes pieces super expensive is, the limited, being exclusive, taking a lot of time going into something, some artists that might have high demand. But even looking into like your more, standard average road pieces, right, that the common person is going to pursue, higher end is going to be more a collector, someone's really into the art of it. But on your average pieces, there's obviously that price difference in terms of things that are made in the US versus things that are made overseas. Same thing with clothing, textiles, anything. And it's due to that labor. The cost of labor per hour is dramatically different in either area. And there's also a litany of some other things. But as that you worked in another industry where things, obviously manufacturing shifted to China, that's obviously also happened in this industry around glass as well. What is kind of your thoughts and just feelings on kind of the current environment in terms of just that average piece for the average consumer being made in the US versus being made overseas?
It's because it's such a high labor content kind of a process, they're always going to win. And that's a shame, but because we're federally illegal still, we don't get a lot of coverage from legal circles. I mean, you go down to your local dispensary and, they're still dealing with ATMs because they can't have credit cards. There are, really foundational issues in the cannabis industry that you really have to love doing what we do to stay here. Business wise, when I put my business hat on, Yeah, I get it. The guys that go out and go to China, I wish they did their own thing instead of knocking stuff off of Instagram. But like I said, that there's nothing to be done about that quite yet. But there's good reasons. I mean, right now China operates at without getting into the emotional issues. Like I just had I got off of another interview where they were talking about China, and it's June. It's Pride Month, and so they were talking about those things, and I was like, yeah, I mean, honestly, the emotional issue is that if you're gay in China, you're going to a re-education camp with the Uyghurs. I can't pronounce that shit. And I just swore. Sorry about that. But when it comes down to it, because I'm on the creative end, the creativity has to be done here. And I think that one of the areas that we still do pretty well at is the creation, the act of creation, the fact that there are still creators. There were a lot more, but they're still out there, and I'm still really happy to have creators who are working with our industry, like North Star and Glass Alchemy and all of the color creators out there, the Boro Batch guys, and they come out with fabulous colors that we have access to that overseas doesn't get immediately. I mean, they have them; you can see them online. But so that's one of those things. But I'm probably getting off topic. I think that it's something that I understand the numbers don't play out. I think that if you're asking me about the difference, I would just like to hear people own it. That's my big thing. If you understand that something's made in US and that your neighbor who makes $25 an hour is making that thing, and yet to understand that the counterpart in Shenzhen making $25 a month, should you say there is such a thing as an origin. And if you do any shipping whatsoever, you understand the government does care where things come from. It used to be, hey, Sonny, back in the day, when I was growing up, it was everything was labeled as made in Taiwan, made in Japan, made in the Czech Republic, made in France. People kind of took pride in where things were actually created. Now they bone attention. People don't want to tell you it's from China. They say stuff like, oh, it's shipped from Austin or designed in California or whatnot, which is all double talk to make you think you're getting a made in USA. And of course, that's the money talking, because they're $299 double perk bubbler that you just bad news. That cost them $2 to make in China. Now they spend more on marketing, that's for sure, but it's hiding where it's from is my big thing. It's my business goes. I'd like people to own it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and that's fine. You say the created in the United States, and myself personally, I look at that and I'm like, I know exactly what this is. But to the average consumer, they're just going to gloss over it, connect certain dots, and it's not exactly telling the correct story. Yep. Another thing with manufacturing, certain things stateside versus overseas, quality. Quality is always a subjective conversation. What makes something the best or better? That can be subjective, or it can be backed, obviously, with some factuals. What's your take on the production, at least the quality? I mean, it's beyond just like the labor it goes into something that's labor intensive. It's clear cut, like why something's going to cost more. And feeling, like you said, feeling prideful. But what about that quality to the end consumer, and kind of where's that line in terms of things that are traditionally made overseas and then traditionally made stateside?
I actually have a good background here because we were having a time at General Electric with the first plant overseas to China. Just terrible durability issues. And what I would is, for those of you who still read, a book that came out recently is called Made in China. And it's not so much to ban I always say this, it's not the line workers that I'm talking about. It's the companies and how they're run. And so an example of this, I have an older truck, good old GMC, over 200,000 miles, and car, a Ford. And I go into the dealer, and all the weather stripping on the windows was all dry rotted out. And I assumed it was because of the UV radiation here in Phoenix. But the guy said, no. This is, this was endemic to this series of years. We had put in a whole bunch of specifications the Chinese didn't follow because you can't see it. They don't. And so I did some reading on it. And as an example, there is UV plasticizer that goes in the injection molding process. And because you and I look at the car and it looks like black rubber to us, it's black rubber. No, it's Chinese black rubber, and that's going to rot on you in about 2 or 3 years versus that I bought in my old truck, which was made in USA, and they did it the right way. And so in much the same vein with glass, there's 2 things that I can say with absolute authority. Number one, they don't always use Pyrex. There is a refractory index that every material has, every transparent material. And when you pass and you put it into, in this case, mineral oil being the refractive medium, certain glass will disappear and certain glass will stay in view. When you use soft glass or sodium silicate, disappear in mineral oil. You can't see it. The glass actually bends around it instead of going through. When you've got borosilicate, you can still see it. And I just on a whim went out, bought a couple of pieces that I knew were Chinese, dunked them in mineral oil. Sure enough, was purported to be Pyrex, disappeared. I called the owner of that company and said, "Hey, I got bad news for you. You're not being followed." He thought I was a crack and laughed at me. So I made him a video, and I was like, "Go try it yourself." So he came back, and he's like, "I can't even believe it." And sure, the clear borosilicate was not durable for what we do. The second thing that China is very good is the annealing. And so forgive me for technical stuff, but when you have whether it's steel or glass, you handle and mutilate it to turn it into door side panel of your car or your windshield or a glass bong, what you're doing is destroying the internal structure. You can't see that, but you do see it in performance. Things break, they'll either rust or they'll fail. And so what the Chinese don't do with quality is, I've seen studio after shop after factory after video where stuff comes out and goes out onto a cooling table. What are you doing? You have to heat treat. We call it annealing. You can't see it. You can see the copious number of $100 bills going out of my wallet because we heat treat and anneal everything. I'm definitely a favorite of local electricity provider. APS loves me because we run a lot of annealing ovens, and they're not cheap to buy, and they're even less to run because we're keeping the glass at a consistent 1,050 after we work it. And what that allows is that once you've destroyed the crystal structure, the heat allows the glass that's been ruined to go back into and lock back together so that it's nice and strong. If you don't anneal it, you're getting a structure that looks like this. So the first time you pop it, that glass is going to crack, shatter, be destroyed, and glass always breaks. There is no unglass out there. Sorry, everybody. But Pyrex annealed properly is strong, will last. One of my favorite things to do, field emails from 25 years ago, people that are like, I just broke my, my Saturn bulb, or I just broke, this thing. Do you guys still make that by any chance? Sorry, no, that's 25. It's one of those things that, about the quality issue. Yeah, it's always the things you can't see. The drywall in Florida, China put a bunch of lead in it. Now everybody's poisoning. Oops. A couple of years back when they were adding melamine to baby formula is a big thing right now. Well, formula producers tried to send that shit to China too. Melamine, and a couple of kids died. And then we found out the hard way that you can't see melamine in a white powder or a white liquid. So if you can't see it, China do it. And that's just, there's many things in the United States that we take for granted because we have a somewhat top necessary legal system that gives people the opportunity to, if somebody produces something that's bad for you or doesn't work way, there's either a lawsuit or a recall. Good luck with getting a Chinese recall. It's going to happen. So some of the differences
that. Yeah, it extends past the, like you said, it's not things that you see, and honestly not things that you think of, and I can definitely understand that. Thank you for providing those examples. Moving back to Chameleon for a second and some of the stuff you guys do. Could you give me some insight on the Typhoon Series?
Yeah, so I'm not going to make any bones about it. I had a smoke shop, place tobacco in a couple of locations. And there was a company in Germany called Hurricane, specifically made water pipes. And the store down the street from me made a call, and pretty funny story. He was a glass blower, had a store, and I was a glass blower, and I had a store. And he called up the Hurricane distributor in North Carolina, this guy's knocking your shit off, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't. It was actually him. And he had that's where the tsunami line of pipes came out of China. It was actually Freddie. And so, he, called up and said all kinds of rotten things. And that was the end of my Hurricane. And it was a good seller. So I sat back and I was well, all right. I'm not going to knock his shit off. Freddie won. Ha, he got to me. I had been to Germany and speak fluent German. And so when I ran into the owner of Hurricane at the trade show in Vegas, we had a nice conversation that ended Freddie's distributorship. The long and the short of it was I wanted to do something that utilized the Bernoulli's law, which is that, basically the common tongue, Bernoulli's law is nature abhors a vacuum. And when you create a vacuum, nature is going to try and destroy that as fast as possible. And so back then, I was working with Adam, was one of the guys on my staff, and we were like, okay, what do we do to create situation where we limit the vacuum at the bowl and we create the vacuum at the mouthpiece. If you can get enough kilopascal between, that's how the hurricane works. But we don't want to have any water. We don't want to have a big piece. Again, going back to Mitch, pipe for the people type of thing. We did the Typhoon, and we made we basically we put it through its paces by attaching it to a parts per million counter, and we refined the piece, and so what we found is that high dispersion of particulate was what was going to cause the tar ashes that were still relatively hot to stick to the inside of the glass. So we went with, and of course, in aerodynamics, you do edges. That's why airplanes and spaceships are all smooth. And so slits weren't going to do it because they had hard 90-degree angles on it. So what we tried was to design a piece that had no edges whatsoever, and a piece that would fill up the amount of vacuum that would properly, without concentrating all of the smoke in the center. And because the smoke looks good in the center, but it doesn't do anything. It's just a show. And with the original Typhoon, it was on the market for a couple of years, and then I got into it with a that no longer exists in Austin, and found out that he was basically, unfortunately, I had to get an attorney involved, and my attorney was convinced to Phil that probably shouldn't do that. And so we've been running with this line that creates a good flow, is not a turbulent kind of airflow or smoke flow, but does disperse the smoke so that the heavier particles can use the centrifugal filtration, centrifugal or centripetal force, to force the larger particles out the edge of the glass where they're hotter than the ambient air, so they stick. And so the Typhoon was a real hit. Still outperforms particles per million wise anything on the market, and is still a great seller. And I've got people that really swear by it as the best dry pipe you can get. It's a dry pipe that smokes like a water pipe.
Using so that's science to make that happen.
Science guy is definitely a hero.
I love it, man. I love it. What do you got next for Chameleon throughout the rest of the year?
Well, probably the big thing that we've got going on is a gentleman came over. We talked for a long time, and he had been doing had been kind of bouncing around. You got two big areas where glass artistry is really fostered. It's an East Coast, West Coast thing. You got Eugene on the West Coast, and you got Asheville on the East Coast. And he had before, back and forth between those two. Spent some time in Vegas, LA, that kind of a thing. And so the big new thing for me is definitely we had orphaned a lot of the water pipes after Black Monday with Ashcroft. And once we got, I was involved with MPP, and we got Prop 203 through here in Arizona for medical back in the day, and watching things. And I always wanted back to the functional art water pipe. Always wanted to get back into the artistry of that. And so about 3 years ago, the lathes out of storage, making general feather wrap and rake, good color changer kind of stuff, but nothing wow. And Brian came up and he's like, "You're here," and I can do that. And so we shook hands, and he's going through, and there's a big difference between true one-off artistry and production. Production, while it's not machine, it's still all hand. Production is a little bit more bitch because it's got to be pretty consistent to make it available financially. You have to have access to consistent raw materials, consistent processing, and so it's there's a lot of things that go into being an artist, and it takes a while. And I would say that the big new thing for us is that we finally putting out we're putting out beautiful artwork in bongs, the way I've always been known to put out beautiful artwork in hand pipes and chillums and the more of the dry stuff. And so most excited about is larger vessel work that has that beautiful eye-catching, and yet we're going to make 10 of them in a day kind of a thing, whereas something that is really spectacular the artist could be working on for weeks on end. And that's really good for individuals, but it doesn't necessarily translate to, which is much more of a production format. So I'm really excited. Thing for me is to get back into having the opportunity to, without a lot of concern from the federal authorities, get back into making water pipes, because that really was, if you look at who got popped on Black Monday, it was all the water. It was Chong because it was Tommy. They said it was Jason because it was JBD, but it was all of anybody who was in the water pipe business got visited. I don't know how I didn't. We were still mainly hand pipes at that time, but man, as of 2000, that was it. As of 2015, we got back into it, got the lathes out of storage, got things rolling, and finally have got that rhythm where we're like, okay, 5 of these today, 10 of those tomorrow, this series on Thursday. Oh, look, we got this color from Glass Alchemy again, do some of these. So it's really, that's the exciting part of what I do.
I love that. And thank you. I was going to ask about that, the production versus the unique art and what goes into that while still keeping it handmade. So lots of game there. Ken, really appreciate you hopping on here and chatting with us today, letting people know about Chameleon, your journey, and just so many aspects of the glass game. I know I learned some stuff. Anybody out there looking for more information, chameleonglass.com. Anything else you want to plug real quick before I get you up out of here?
No, man, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been a lot of fun. If you guys have any questions, some answers, you know where to find me. And again, thanks for having me on the cast.
Awesome. Thank you, Ken. This is the RMR Podcast, episode 39. We'll be